So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Schlesinger. I'm a solutions advisor in the retail sector for the Center for Professional and Executive Development. And I'm excited to have you here with us today as we hear from our executive in residence for retail about building resilient, multi-generational teams. But before I introduce Kathleen, I want to share just a few words with you about the Wisconsin Center, the Wisconsin School of Business, and our Center for Professional Executive Development. CPED offers an online and in-person programs and certificates that give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive learning sessions facilitated by instructors with practical business experience. We also partner with organizations to provide customized professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. So for more information about all the things that we offer at the Center for Professional Executive Development, I invite you to visit our website at uwcped.org. I want to go over just a few logistics for today's session. So Kathleen will be our presenter. I will be behind the scenes, but we also have some moderators to help us along the way. But if you have any questions that you would like to ask during today's webinar, you can submit those questions either using the chat function. Myself and Brooke will be monitoring that chat, as well as the QA buttons at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. So we're going to pose all those questions that are submitted through that QA chat and at the chat at the end of today's session. But if there's a burning question, put it in all caps and write question. And I trust that Kathleen will be fine with me interrupting her and asking that burning question if you have that. So again, just want to make sure that you are here, we are engaged, and we are able to connect with you during this session, during the chat and the QA function. And with that, I would now like to introduce you to Kathleen Cronin. So Kathleen is a former leader and business partner to executive teams at Revolution Foods and Starbucks Coffee Company. Kathleen has collaborated on strategic direction and managing all aspects of human capital and talent development. With 2 master's degrees in fine arts and certified PMP, she has worked in both the US and abroad in architecture and design consulting, and most notably and importantly for today's call, in the retail industry. She also serves as an executive in residence at the center, and she works with me closely to help provide guidance and solutions that really provide insight into the custom sessions and deliveries that we can provide to you. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you all for joining us today. Over my career, I've had the great privilege of working with a lot of wonderful leaders from all walks of life. I was able to work with a gentleman from Rwanda while I was at Starbucks. Arthur survived the Rwandan Civil War as an orphaned child refugee. He had no formal education whatsoever, and he negotiates all of the coffee contracts Starbucks has all over the continent of Africa. As he explained to me early in our working relationship, I became multilingual because I had to learn to ask for rice in different refugee settlements all over the African continent. Arthur shared this proverb with me as we collaborated on training materials for international teams. He felt its wisdom was simple, profound, and understandable by every individual from any country. And I've used it as the inspiration for almost every training I've developed since that time. Because like Arthur, I think, we can read a book on leadership, approach, or style. We can do that quickly alone. We can read Harvard Business Review. We can go to conferences, and we can grasp new ideas quickly. But implementing the ideas requires us to collaborate closely with others. If we want to be great leaders, we can't really think of our journey alone. All the really wonderful leaders I've worked with think of their journey as one with their teams. And it's a mindset that I think is very helpful for us. Next slide. So Kate talked about the chat window. Of course, please jump in with that, but also try to minimize distractions while we're talking, because that way we all get the most out of it. Our focus is really on helping you understand and apply what we're talking about. So please engage and let us know if you have questions, because we want to add your perspective to our discussions. Next slide. All webinars, training experiences of any kind, I think it's important to be very clear at the beginning about what we hope to accomplish in this small session together. And this session has been designed to help leaders of multi-generational teams think about fostering an environment of continuous learning and growth. You know, a growth mindset is fundamental to effective engagement. So we want to talk about how important that is. Then we want to talk about how there are different ways of leveraging the diversity of experience on a multi-generational team that will enable the team to facilitate greater broad learning and build resilience together. And then finally, we're interested in helping generate some insights and helping you take some positive action with some solution-based ideas and tools. So building resilience on a multi-generational team is an enormous, very big topic. So we wanted to break it down into, you know, some smaller pieces that we can focus in on to help everyone leave the conversation with some actionable ideas that they can apply. So we're going to start at a high level. You know, why is resilience important for teams? This is an idea that a lot of people don't talk about very much, but I think it's important as a foundational idea. And then we'll talk about the power of engagement on multi-generational team. I think all of us who are leaders recognize how important engaging others is. But on a multi-generational team, it has a unique importance and power. So let's talk about that a little bit. Then we'll look at different ways we can leverage the diverse experience and perspectives across the team in order to build on-the-job learning all the time and resilience across the team as you go. And finally, we'll drill down in a more granular way to look at how to use a specific process that we all are familiar with and use all the time as a vehicle for integrating the diverse experience of your team when you have a multi-generational team. Next slide. So let's be clear on what we're talking about when we discuss resilience. Resilience is an ineffable quality. It's something we develop over our whole lives. It's an important set of thoughts and behaviors and actions, and we can learn them from the time we're a small child through our entire lives. I've seen people recently, actually, some people that are octogenarians and older demonstrate some real resilience in learning new techniques and new skills. Some of us are lucky enough to begin developing these skills in childhood. We grow up in an encouraging environment that pushes us to take risks and try new things. And by the time we start our career, we have developed a tiny bit of muscle memory and maybe a little mild confidence in our ability to get back up when things don't go well. But for an awful lot of us, our coaching experiences and first jobs are places where our first leaders start to talk to us about our resilience and persevering when obstacles are in our way. And it's important for leaders, I think, of every kind of team to identify the need for resilience in individuals and try to encourage them and coach them, because it's inevitable that we'll face obstacles and unforeseen challenges during our careers. So learning about what resilience is and that it lives inside you and you can access it when you need to, it's a very important idea. One of the metaphors I've used with teams, and when I had multi-generational teams in particular, was that, you know, a career is like a series of decathlons. We go to college, we get a degree, we have a kind of naive idea about the career we're going to step out and do. And we get our first job, we have to get our first apartment, start paying our bills. We make a lot of adjustments and we learn how to do all those things. And then, oops, you know, another person enters our life and we have to learn all of those things with someone else, or we get a new job or go have to live in a different city. And we have to continually master new skills. Some of them we don't think of as skills, paying your bills, securing apartments, but really they are. And they help us develop resilience in facing the next obstacle, the next job, the next set of experiences. But it's a good metaphor to keep in mind, especially when you're coaching people early in their career. Next slide. So resilience has certain attributes. And as we read through these attributes about teams with resilience, I think it's very important to recognize how important the culture of the team is to the development of resilience. A deeply held sense of purpose on a team, that comes from the top. When leaders are committed to the work they're doing and support their teams and individuals with enthusiastic encouragement, individuals feel deeply connected to the work, more engaged with what they're doing. It's a kind of conscious leadership, recognizing that if you can help your teams be resilient and work positively together and recognize their strengths, individuals on your team will probably produce more initiative. And team members focus on the strengths of each other, and they accomplish work with more ownership because they have developed the capability to recognize that they're learning as they go and that there are growth in each of the challenges that they're facing. I think one of the key things to building resilience on a team and managing a multi-generational team well is operating with the mindset that we all have different gifts. And each of our gifts are important contributions, and that our gifts are susceptible to growth throughout our lives and throughout our careers. Seeing some team members as more valuable than others can sometimes demonstrate bias and undermine a culture of unity and resilience. So purpose and perseverance are important elements on any team that's successful, and they're developed from a leader's modeling of those traits. So the more you invest in letting people see that you trust them and you believe deeply in what you're doing and you know you can help them accomplish their goals and all your goals together, people begin to develop a bit more resilience individually. Next slide. So on a multi-generational team, it's not more or less important, but it's uniquely powerful to use engagement as a way of leading. I mean, every team, trying to lead any team feels challenging. Different generations, different cultures, social styles, all of those different aspects of each unique human on your team requires flexibility and understanding. I think over my career as I led people is when I really developed a lot of tolerance for different ideas and different perspectives. And I think a very important element is grace, understanding that people make mistakes, people offer odd ideas, people approach work very differently. And in the exercise of trying to get to know your team, there's really nothing more important than engaging with each of them, understanding who they are, who their families are, and how did they come to be a part of your team? What's their career journey, so to speak? The variety of experience and knowledge can be paralyzing sometimes. And people think, oh, I don't have time to get to know all these individuals. But it's actually an opportunity to develop your key leadership skills of listening and learning from others. Because the more you invest in getting to know people and hearing their perspectives and facilitating their involvement, the more involved they feel and the more ownership they have for the work they're doing. It's an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you can learn from each member of the team and that you're not intimidated to admit that you don't have all the answers, and perhaps all of us together have the answer. I learned this lesson in a really interesting way, pretty dramatic fashion a long time ago. I was working as a consultant. We were supporting the leadership team of a manufacturing concern. And about 18 months prior to our joining on a continuous improvement effort, they had introduced a brand new home maintenance tool with a huge marketing blitz. There had been a lot of ads and a lot of buzz, and the initial sales were really very impressive, bigger than anybody anticipated. But shortly after the release of the product, they started developing some problems, which turned into a lot of negative publicity. The CEO hired a well-known big consulting group to come in. They had engineering expertise, and they asked them to analyze the assembly of the machine and figure out what was wrong. And the consultants went to great expense. You know, they analyzed all the broken machinery, and they advised the organization to re-engineer and retrofit all the machines they'd already produced and redesign the machines that were in assembly. And revenue took a huge hit. They had a 6-figure fee to the consulting group. They had redesign work. They had retrofitting. Of course, everything slowed down. All the time frames, milestones were all missed. And there were a lot of customer recovery costs. I wasn't a part of that work. But as I said, we were helping the manufacturing operations group with some continuous improvement about 18 months later. And I was in the plant talking to the foreman when the CEO came in on a tour. And he asked the foreman how the retrofitted assembly was working. The foreman smiled, and he said that the new parts worked well. But he continued, and he said, you know, we could have saved the company an awful lot of money and time. All we needed to solve the original problem was a wrench extension. You see, the early design didn't leave enough clearance for proper assembly, and we didn't have the right tool. I will never forget the stunned look on that CEO's face as he asked again, the consultant never met with you or your team about the problem? It was a really powerful lesson in making sure that you're asking good questions and you're engaging everybody on the team, because you can learn a lot by doing that and asking a few more questions and involving a few more people. So the next slide. Asking good questions of every member of your team is obviously the most effective way to engage them in a powerful, ongoing dialogue. When you talk to everybody, you hear a lot more. You learn details, and you learn things from different team members about what's going on. It allows you to be a more effective leader because you can get through some of the bureaucracy because you know more detail. It takes some time and a lot of conscious effort to really get to know your team members in this way, getting to know who they are. If you're not naturally an extrovert, this work is very deliberative, and it can take energy away from other professional and personal responsibilities. But leading in this way models your trust and confidence with everybody on the team. When a team's led this way with trust and inclusion, they really accomplish more together with speed and efficiency because they trust each other, and they have confidence that together they have accomplished a lot and they will continue to accomplish more. Asking good questions is just the key to making all this happen across your team, because they see you doing that, and it models for them asking good questions of others, and it models for them the confidence that you should ask questions. You don't necessarily have all the information you need. Next slide. So the next area of focus is about leveraging the diverse experience and perspectives on your team to actually build resilience. As we've been talking about, managing inclusively with an openness to the perspectives of everybody on your team, it forces us as leaders to really operate with a lot of conscious awareness of our own biases. Because as we work to continuously improve the efficiency and impact of our teams, we have to continually look at all the different processes that we're using and see them as an opportunity to break down potential historical stereotypes or expose biases. And in doing so, we strengthen the communication abilities of people on our team. We strengthen the understanding of the different members of the team, especially if they're come from different generations or different cultures. The more we hear one another's ideas and reactions to things, it gives us a lot of insight into each other. The other outcome is that individuals on your team learn from an early time that time and effort and a lot of cooperation is involved in making positive change. And they learn they have a role in making that change happen. It's not always easy to talk openly about how and when stereotypes and biases have interfered with success. And engaging your team in talking about those things, sometimes feels scary to people because maybe it's a conversation you're not sure you can control. But if it's focused on a process that everyone is touching and you're trying to continuously improve that process, involving your team in that builds knowledge and skills and behaviors that are resilient. By involving all team members, let's say your newest hire with your longest tenured person, to look at a process that might need adjusting, improving. It's part of an ongoing continuous improvement effort. When you put different people together, when you ask for those different perspectives, you drive on the job learning for the broadest possible number of team members inside your regular work. And you begin to relieve yourself of the responsibility for having all the answers and coming up with all the strategies. Your team, asking your team to identify what's not working, but you're also asking them to be a part of how do we change that and what's the solution look like. Next slide. This is really all about sharing power. When you engage other people and you involve them and you get their perspectives included in the process, people develop trust across the ranks. They begin to recognize that the person next to them has a very different experience, but wow, that was an interesting insight I hadn't thought of. That diversity and those different experiences become kind of a secret sauce of your team. And it becomes, it's geographic or decentralization or different locations or different generations become part of the strength of the team. Because you're sharing power and engaging and involving others and consistently gathering feedback. And then, of course, key, you have to take action on that feedback and that input and model that ability to listen, improvise, and collaborate well with others. When you do this, you're modeling a lot of strength and confidence. Individuals and teams build resilience in the face of challenges with the trust and support of those around them. If you know your leader's got your back and you know your leader believes you can do something and your leader's asked you to do it and given you the support you needed, you build confidence in the process of doing that. I think one of the key things this kind of leadership helps develop is the ability for individuals on the team and the team together to create new realistic plans in the face of challenges. We all run into them. There are budget cuts, there are product delays, leadership changes, reorganizations. I mean, millions of things are unforeseen challenges in all of our professional lives. And we have to continually adjust. And people that are on teams that have encouraging and confident support have build the ability to readjust and say, okay, what's next? This isn't working. We have to move on. This is our next approach. We're going to take a moment for a chat on the next slide, because I'm very interested to hear different people's perspectives on, what's gained in professional development skills and capabilities when you include people from all different levels of their career in conscious, inclusive, equitable process. What's gained from that? I'd love to hear from people's different ideas on that.
I see the little bubbles of people typing.
Oh, good.
It's like some are coming in, collaboration.
Yep.
Behavior skills that impact meaningful change. more inclusion, broader ownership,
Absolutely.
more collaboration. Yeah, well, some repeats here, but yes.
No, I mean, but this is the idea. And if you think about it, as a leader of a team, you want everybody on your team to be an able-bodied collaborator and be able to work in close collaboration with anybody that they are required to work on. We want our teams to develop the ideas of inclusion and looking around and recognizing, gosh, all the good ideas are not just in my head, all the good ideas are in the whole team's head. So if we involve people, and sometimes this is frightening. I mean, I remember the first time I had an early in career person, and I included them in an interview panel. We were teaching them how to review resumes, and it was a little bit like the first time you get in a car with a child who's learning to drive. You've handed over control to somebody else, and your process depends upon them stepping up and behaving professionally. And of course, there's a lot of training involved in it. But what I found from that experience was that individual felt so confident that people had asked them to be involved in this process, and they were brand new to the company, that it almost changed the arc of that individual's career on the team. And it was just one small acknowledgement that you're absolutely capable of doing this work, and we'd love to have your insight in the next person we bring on the team. So I have found all of these things: collaboration, behavior skills that help move towards productive change, greater inclusion, broader ownership. It all eventually leads to a person who's a little bit more self-aware about what they can contribute to a team and how they might have a variety of skills they haven't even tapped into yet. And this is, I think, one of the key things great leaders do. They see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And they say to us, I think you can do that. Let's give it a try. That does amazing things for people, no matter where they are in their career. Thanks so much for weighing in on that. Next slide. So we all know how challenging it is to lead with an engaged style. It takes energy, it takes time, it takes focus, it takes a lot of self-awareness on your part. But there are real benefits to be realized from this kind of approach. I mean, there are dividends that this pays in the long run, in terms of the more you relieve yourself of the burden of having all the answers for all these different things, the more involved other people are, the more ideas they generate, the easier your job becomes. And leading in this way models an equitable, inclusive idea. And when you do that, you minimize a lot of drama, potentially, by demonstrating in your everyday actions that everyone on your team is interested and involved, and you want to hear from them, their perspectives. It limits the power of hierarchy in getting things done. So we jumped into the topic at a really high level. Why is resilience even an important idea? And why do we need to think about helping individuals on our team develop resilience? And then drill down a little bit into specific leadership activities, looking at building resilience and confidence through the power of our specific engagement as leaders. And then talking about how we can leverage the power of all their diverse ideas to involve the broadest possible cross-section of your team in continuous improvement efforts, which facilitates on-the-job learning. So there's a nice virtuous circle that becomes part of the reward. Let's drill down a little further and look at what it might end up looking like if we try to apply these ideas to a specific set of processes. I've chosen the hiring practices because this is something every leader has to juggle with. And we all know there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities for improvement in all of these processes and how we practice the art of hiring and interviewing. But where should we start? If we want to improve it with our team and we want to involve people in the process, it only makes sense to begin with job descriptions. So let's look first at job descriptions. Next slide. Job descriptions, we all know, are a legal document. They explain the tasks, functions, responsibilities of each position, theoretically describe how the work should be completed, and connect the work of an individual job to the larger missions and values and goals of organizations. So people can see that connection very literally. They also require continuous editing. I mean, I'm sure everybody who's on the webinar has had the experience of having a job description that really doesn't describe the actual work that you do. And they have to be reconsidered regularly to evaluate the language, grammar, bias that might have filtered in there over time. And it is a constant struggle because all the data involved in them is dynamic. And so continuous refinement is to keep up with them is almost it's just sort of a nightmare that's recurring. But I think this presents an opportunity. And I leveraged this idea from a leader who gave it to me. That's where I got this idea. And I have found it to be a very effective way of altering the problem landscape around job descriptions. If you ask your team to be involved in the work of regularly refining job descriptions, it builds a professional capability. I mean, if you're early in your career, eventually you want to manage people. You need to learn how to craft a job description, and it's not the sort of assignment you can learn in school. And so having people involved in it builds capabilities. Delegating this work to those that are doing the work can give you a head start in keeping the forms up to date. So what I do is I make a up-to-date job description part of every new hire's 6-month goals. I'm a big believer in immersion planning and giving a new hire a nice runway, 3 to 6 months, with a long view of what your expectations are. But I've found to ask new hires to have a rewritten job description as part of their 6-month plan keeps job descriptions more up to date and more accurate than I ever found any other system of using it. So if you see the problem in a different light and turn it around and think of it as a way of building capabilities on the team, it involves people in a deeper way. Next slide. So after job descriptions, the next step in a hiring opportunity is, where will we advertise? How will we identify our opening? And sometimes this is a very automatic process. Organizations have their tried and true sites that they use and ways of communicating their openings. But I think this is also an opportunity to engage your team. I mean, once you've identified an opportunity and people have had a chance to weigh in on what the real job is, and we have a current job description, how should we tell people about this? Ask your team, are we advertising everywhere we might find talent? Do they have any other ideas? Are there places they frequent that maybe you don't, that are a source for new talent? The same is true of your contracts, where you post sites and things. These all need to be reviewed, and a team member who is learning about the hiring process is just as good as anyone else to review websites for biased languages or images that are contrary to the mission of the organization or your team. And I think involving your team in the work around even where will we post our opening helps people understand in greater detail what the hiring process involves, and helps them see that every step in the process represents your organization, and we need to strategically think about how we are advertising the openings on our team, and strategically be thinking about, are there new places and different places we need to be looking for talent? Next slide. Reviewing and selecting candidates for a potential opportunity. This is something you don't learn in school. It takes practice. And learning to review resumes of potential candidates is always the expertise of talent acquisition. But involving other people in the team at each stage in the process, it requires a learning. And it asks people to consider things from a different perspective. I remember the first time I had a young woman on my team involved in the reviewing and selecting of candidates. It was an eye-opening experience for her because she hadn't understood why it had taken her so long to get a job until she started reviewing cover letters. And once she had a chance to review dozens of cover letters, she learned a very practical bit of knowledge that in the future, cover letters needed to be, a couple of short sentences with a lot of keywords and not a summary of your resume. And it was a fun conversation with her, having this realization that she hadn't wanted to be involved in this part of it because she thought she was busy enough already. But it was eye-opening and learning for her in her long career. And she actually found that she enjoyed the work much more than she had imagined. So involving your team does all sorts of things in helping you think through a new approach, a new place to find talent. People gain skills in looking through what are people's notable achievements? Does this work history and these skills really match up with what we're looking for? There's a lot of learning involved in that. When a new person is brought in to learn the skills of phone and video screening, there's a lot of basic presentation skills that are learned in that process. They understand how to use questions in a new way, and they can give new perspectives on potential talent. Involving a broader group of people in your interviewing process, in your resume screening process, really helps widen your net for talent, because it opens up your perspective to other additional talent and additional ideas you might not have considered. Next screen. So here we have a couple of tools that we are providing as part of the webinar, and they will be sent to you as part of the email follow-up in the next day or two following our webinar. The first tool is a set of questions that were developed, over a long period of time that help us keep in mind the idea that we need to consider broadly how we approach hiring. Understanding how to efficiently and effectively manage an interview process, as I've said, these are not skills we are born with. They're things we develop with experience. No one intuitively knows how to do this, but involving a variety of different team members in the creation of your interview panels is a critical skill building effort for leaders, and it can enable you to build greater diversity as you grow, because you will approach the effort with new ideas. So these are just thought-starting questions for leaders as they think about developing an interview panel. What will be the benefit of including different generations and diverse cultural backgrounds in the interview panel? What team members need exposure to good interviewing techniques to become valuable interviewers for the team? Can we partner experienced team members with newer tenured professionals to create more inclusive interview panels? What preparations are necessary to ensure that all team members are prepared to successfully participate in an interview panel? And then how can we better align our interviewing questions with what success looks like in the role we're filling? These are really wonderful questions and a useful tool to work with your team in thinking about how you approach interview panels, and then how you prepare others on the team to be more valuable in that process. The next two slides are a list of top 10 inclusive interview questions. And as I said, the tools will come to you as part of the email follow-up. But this is a list of 10 questions I put together with actually some dear friends who have deep experience in human resources as a part of a project we worked on together. Understanding how to ask important questions in an interview is a learned skill. Let's be honest, most of us avoid challenging conversations and awkward questions to minimize the moments like that in our working lives. But asking tough questions is critical as you go up the ladder in your career, and especially in an interview process. We have put together this list of interview questions to enable you to apply the learning from this session immediately. They're universal questions. I think they can be utilized in any industry and at any level of hire. as we look through them together, please gather your thoughts and reactions or questions you have so that you can share them in the chat function. What kind of experiences have you had relating to people whose background is different than your own? This is a wonderful question because it really is very thought-provoking for any candidate. Number 2, how would you describe your current thinking about diversity, and how has your thinking evolved over time? I've gotten some very interesting information about candidates as they discuss this idea, because of course, over the last few years, everyone's ideas have evolved. In what ways do you think inclusion is important for professionals in this kind of role? Gets people thinking about how they have a role in inclusion, no matter what position they're being hired into. Getting others to discuss their own experiences with bias and diversity and how they handle those is just a model behavioral interviewing question that you'll find extremely valuable. I think number 5 is a question that's a very interesting one in an interview, because people often want to, say they've never had a situation like that. But in today's society, many more people are open to discussing that and discussing what they learned from the process. The next slide has the last 5. If you were hired, how would you use your position to minimize biases and further diversity? All these things, all of these questions are really great behavioral questions that will get a great deal of insight and cause your candidate to reflect deeply on their own experience. And that will give you more perspective on their ability to be successful on your team. Next slide. So onboarding done well accelerates a new employees getting up to speed quickly. I think of them as immersion planning. Onboarding to me is the first week. I think of a detailed plan of what will happen for an individual in that first 7 days. And then immersion planning, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is something I think of as a 6-month process. I mean, it takes about 4 weeks for anybody to even understand what the work is, and then another month to get to know all the people they need to collaborate with, and a third to get everything right on their calendar and understand their role in each of the processes they're involved in. So helping them understand your expectations for the first 6 months of their tenure makes their job easier, and it makes yours easier, frankly, too. The idea of immersion is for them to get to know the business, get to know the team, get to know the broader human resources support they have, spend time with their key collaborative stakeholders, and establishing performance expectations on your team. The other thing they learn is how your team partners with each other in the process of an immersion plan that goes across 6 months. Okay, so now we have a summary slide. Challenges are inevitable. You can facilitate your team and build resilience through engagement as you move through the process. And engaging and involving your multi-generational team really is an in to leveraging their diverse experience and perspectives, building resilience, and overcoming obstacles together. Leveraging the knowledge and experience of your team will add value to your hiring and immersion processes. And apply the questions we've provided to your processes, and I think that you'll find them to be helpful and productive. And with that, I'll hand it back to Kate to facilitate our Q&A.
Hey, you're muted still.
It's out of bound to happen every once in a while.
No problem.
I was saying thank you, Kathleen. I think that was just exceptionally transformational thinking, and the stories, I get the privilege and honor to hear so many of Kathleen's stories. These were all new ones for me today, so I appreciate them. And I think, just the wealth of experience that we've gained from you today is really, really helpful. So just a refresher, we want to make sure that you have the ability to ask your questions. We did get a couple that came in during the session that I just held. So go to that Q&A box. It's either at the top of your screen or the bottom. It says Q&A, and you can just go ahead and type your question. I'm going to open up that box for myself right now. So they just come to me, and then I can read them to you, Kathleen, as they come in. So make sure you're answering your question. You can, of course, also use the chat if you wish to put your question in there. Then everyone sees that question. So one of the questions that came in earlier in the session, and I think it was when you were sort of referencing involving many more people in the interview, in the hiring process, is how can you know if an early in career team member is really ready to be involved in a process like hiring?
That's a good question, because of course, early in career professionals are on a range of their experience and their maturity. I think it depends upon that individual showing up in a professional way under challenges. So an example of this would be if I have several new team members on my team and they have had a plan in place and their goals are clear. I like to see how they respond to a challenge before I think they're ready for involvement on these kind of processes. Because you can often see how a person's self-awareness and maturity play out when they're faced with an obstacle, no matter how small. It's easy to see whether a person has the ability to take a deep breath and calmly say, okay, well, that's new information. I wish I'd had that before, but here's what I think we can do with it. Versus a person who says, well, we can't, people have different reactions to challenges. And so when I have new hires on my team, I test their ability to handle those challenges. And when I see a consistent pattern of a professional response and a person's ability to manage calm confidence, they're ready to take on new things and be involved in things that they perhaps do not think they're ready to be involved in.
Excellent, excellent. We have another question, sort of an interesting twist on the last question. How are you able, if you are not a senior leader currently, how are you able to help your leaders become more resilient leaders if you're not in that position yourself?
So managing up a leader that perhaps is not terribly resilient. That's always an interesting idea. Influencing up is always a challenge in any professional career. But I think trying to understand maybe what that leader's trigger is, where is it that they are, if they lack resilience, where do you see that? Do you see that in a situation where we're running into a budget cut or a timeline or a deadline and we've run over it, and that leader is unable to just calm and say, okay, this is what's happened, here's where we are. I think the best thing we can do in those situations is model that for our leaders. So when we encounter a situation with a leader, and I've been there, a leader who is not handling a problem or a challenge in a professional way, trying to step in and facilitate with the leader, not interfering with hierarchy, but in ways that you are able to, demonstrating. So I'll give an example. I was once facilitating a senior leader meeting at Starbucks Coffee Company, and a disagreement between a couple of senior leaders got very personal. Now, I was a director, so they were SVPs in the room, but it got personal. And to me, it was a moment where someone needed to demonstrate that we can resolve this issue without getting things becoming personal. And so as a facilitator, in a moment where someone took a breath, I suggested that both perspectives had value, and that actually this might be a moment we could all take a break and reflect upon the very different ideas we were considering in this moment. And that might allow us to get back to a more productive kind of conversation. And I looked around and asked if everyone agreed that maybe a short break, 5 minutes, look at your timepiece, and we'll all reconvene in 5 minutes. Now, it was an unusual step to take, but as you've identified, sometimes you're working for someone above you who doesn't have resilience. And I think quick thinking and deep professionalism can allow us to model what we hope they will see in those moments. But also I would, in a time when things are not tense, perhaps in a one-on-one conversation, perhaps you can bring this up, that you've noticed that resilience is a key part of your own managing of a lot of obstacles, and that others on the team, don't have as much resilience. And isn't there a way we could talk about how we might build greater resilience across our team to withstand these kind of moments that are inevitable? We're going to have challenges. We're going to run into obstacles. And how can we handle them best as a team? But that kind of a question comes in a one-on-one and not in a tense environment. But when it's not directed at a person, but it's broader. And one of the tools that you'll get in their follow-up is actually an assessment. It's a resilience assessment, and there's no right or wrong answers to it, but it's a series of questions that will get at this idea of what makes resilience and where do I have resilience? And it might help lead you to greater insight into where your leader lacks resilience if you look through that and ask some questions. But it's a delicate art of influencing up, like in all situations, but I think it can be done well when you talk about it in terms of resilience, because that's a professional term and an attribute we want to encourage in everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. It looks like we have one more question that we'd like to tackle here today before we wrap up. How can you show that you value multi-generational differences in the workplace?
I think the best way to show that you value multi-generational differences is to demonstrate openly and model that you seek the input of everyone on your team. No matter what generation they are, no matter how new they are to the organization, no matter where they've come from, what their journey has been. I've seen some of the best leaders I've worked with are people that they know the story of everyone who works for them, and they know why they're here. And I think the best way to demonstrate that you have those ideas is to very openly, even if you're not yourself an extrovert, if you really are an introvert, push yourself to engage and greet and talk to and ask for feedback and input and ideas from everybody on your team. And when people see you do that, they model that, and you'll be surprised how much you learn from the most surprising person on the team. Will have insight that has never occurred to you. So it will be worth your effort.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Kathleen. So before we end, I do just want to let you know that CPED is ready to help your organization adapt to new strategies, to meet challenging customers and customer trends, to help you influence your workforce. And we'd love to set up a discovery session to talk more about our coaching, our consulting, and our professional development programs like the one we offered today, but more specific, of course, to your unique business model and your retail experience. So my email's on the bottom of the slide. I look forward to meeting you. We will also be sending that follow-up with the recording with many of the tools that Kathleen has referenced throughout the program today. And again, we just want to thank you all for attending the webinar today, and have a great day.